What is the Popol Vuh? The Popol Vuh is one of the most important literary works in history. It was written by the Maya, the Quiche Maya nobility, and the Popol Vuh is one of the world's most exquisite accounts of creation. It features the story of what happens in the afterlife according to the Maya. It expresses this in the story or the saga of the hero twins. I brought this map to show you the limits of the Maya area, which include modern-day Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. And scholars generally talk about the different sites existing in the northern area, the central area, and the southern area. And the Quiche would have been in the central region, central western region here. Let's go over the meaning of the words Popol Vuh. Popol is woven mat and Vuh is book. Therefore, scholars usually translate this to the council book. Who wrote it? Because the text within the Popol Vuh says, quote, "This account we shall now write under the law of God and Christianity. We shall bring it forth because there is no longer the means whereby the Popol Vuh may be seen, the means of seeing clearly." So consequently, this indicates that there are multiple authors. There are multiple authors, and these are anonymous as well. Look what Alan Christensen, one of the leading scholars on the Popol Vuh, who translated it into English, he writes, "The anonymity of the authors is unusual since most colonial period Highland Maya documents were prepared for some official purpose and were duly signed by their authors as testimony of their veracity. For whatever reason, those who were responsible for compiling the Popol Vuh did not wish their identities to be known." Unquote. When was it written? The Popol Vuh, it was likely written between 1554 and 1558. Why? Because the Popol Vuh mentions Juan de Rojas and Juan Cortés, grandsons of kings burned during the conquest. These kings were killed by Pedro de Alvarado, and the whereabouts of Juan de Rojas and Juan Cortés can be traced in colonial documents. Christensen reports, quote, "The signatures of these kings appear on the last page of the Título Totonicapán, which is dated September 28, 1554. And here is the Título Totonicapán, and the signatures appear here. Indio Joseph Cortés, and then Indio Juan de Rojas." And then let's continue reading. The Popol Vuh must have been written prior to 1558 because by that date, Don Juan de Rojas had disappeared from colonial records and had presumably died. Thus, the royal title of Don Francisco Iscuin Neaib, dated November 22, 1558, is signed by Don Juan Cortés and Don Martín, kings of the Quiche at Santa Cruz. The Popol Vuh also refers to one Don Pedro de Robles as a current Lord Magistrate of the Neaib lineage. Pedro de Robles is known to have taken office soon after 1554. Therefore, the Popol Vuh must have been written sometime between the years 1554 and 1558. Stories like those in the Popol Vuh were likely written in screenfolds or books that the Maya scribes created. These books were highly esteemed, and as the Popol Vuh itself says, the books were consulted at key moments. For example, look at this text from the Popol Vuh. Quote, "Cucumas and Cotua were enchanted people and enchanted lords. Kikab and Kauzima were also enchanted lords. They knew if there would be war. It was clear before their faces. They saw if there would be death, if there would be hunger. They surely knew if there would be strife. There was an instrument of sight. There was a book. Popol Vuh was their name for it." Unquote. I should explain that the Maya were literate, which means that they had writing. Now, writing is a really important invention in human history, and there are only very few places where writing first developed, and that would be in China, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and also in Mesoamerica. Now, before the conquest, the Maya had hundreds of books recording everything that was important to them, including, obviously, their history and their mythology or theology. Only 3 survived the destruction of the conquest. There's actually a 4th called the Grolier, but the authenticity of this manuscript is being debated by scholars. Alonso de Zorita, who was a Spanish lawyer who came to central Mexico and also to the Maya region in the 1550s, he saw these screenfolds and said that the Maya had paintings about the Maya books, which Spaniards call paintings. And he said, quote, paintings that they had which recorded their history for more than 800 years back and which were interpreted for me by very ancient Indians. This is important because it indicates how many Spaniards, including lawyers, soldiers, and especially friars, were in very close communication with the sages and the scribes, with the indigenous sages and scribes. And most indigenous peoples were really gracious and explained in great detail about their civilization, their history, and their books. And then Fray Bartolomé de las Casas also saw these screenfolds, and he said that the Maya wrote with, quote, figures and characters by which they could signify everything they desired, and that these great books are of such astuteness and subtle technique that we could say our writing does not offer much of an advantage. In other words, the Maya did not need European writing in order to record what was important to them in books. Sadly, most of the manuscripts, like I said before, that the Maya had in their royal archives or in their libraries were destroyed, and only 3 survived. And here to your left is an image of one of the surviving manuscripts. The surviving manuscripts are called Codex Madrid, Codex Dresden, and Codex Paris. They bear the names of the city that owns them at this moment. And Fray Bartolomé de las Casas writes about the destruction of the books. He says, quote, these books were seen by our clergy, and even I saw part of those which were burnt by the monks, apparently because they thought they might harm the Indians in matters concerning religion, since at that time they were at the beginning of their conversion. And then Diego de Landa, who was a ruthless and zealous Catholic priest, he was absolutely horrendous to indigenous peoples. He wrote, quote, we found a large number of books of these characters, and as they contained nothing in which there were not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, we burned them all, which they regretted to an amazing degree and which caused them much affliction, unquote. Keep in mind that the stories of the Popol Vuh predate the conquest in the early 1500s. Yet in the colonial period, Maya scribes recorded in alphabetic text in Latin script stories from the Popol Vuh. And I like to read this long quote by Christensen because it beautifully expresses how much the Maya held on to their traditions in spite of the colonial yoke. He writes, quote, the pre-Columbian version of the Popol Vuh has unfortunately been lost. Even the authors of the 16th century manuscript copy wrote that the more ancient book could no longer be seen in their day, and that what they compiled was based on the original. The authors were traditionalists in the sense that they recorded the history and theology of the ancient highland Maya people without adding material from European sources. The Popol Vuh, thus, contains very little direct Christian influence. By its own account, it is a faithful record of the contents of the ancient Popol Vuh text, which could no longer be seen. Although the traditions of the book were compiled after the conquest, quote, under the law of God and Christianity, unquote, its Quiché authors venerated their traditional Maya gods as luminous, wise beings who brought life and light to the world through their creative works. The statement that the Popol Vuh was composed within Christianity immediately follows a declaration that the Maya gods, quote, accomplished their purpose in purity of being and in truth, unquote, long before the arrival of the Christian God. Such unapologetic reverence for the ancient gods would have been offensive to the Spanish missionaries. During the early decades of the Spanish conquest, the most obvious expressions of Maya religion and literature were either destroyed or forced into hiding. All hieroglyphic books were singled out as dangerous hindrances, to the conversion of the people and were actively sought out and destroyed. Those who were found in possession of such books were persecuted and even killed." Unquote. Now, perhaps one of the reasons that they would hide would be because of the cruel treatment on the part of the Catholic Church against indigenous peoples. Alonso de Zorita, the Spanish lawyer who was in the Maya region in 1555, wrote that the lords of Utatlan were at the time, quote, "as poor and miserable as the poorest Indian of the town, and their wives fixed the tortillas for dinner because they had no servants, nor any means of supporting them. They themselves carried fuel and water for their houses. The principal lord was named Don Juan de Rojas, the second Don Juan Cortes. They were all extremely poor. They left sons who were all penniless, miserable tribute payers, for the Spaniards do not exempt any Indians from payment of tribute." Unquote. This is indicating how ruthless colonial society was for the Maya. And because all of the wealth was being transferred to Spain, they became poor and penniless and could not continue to build the beautiful cities and the gorgeous artworks that they had created before the conquest. Let's go over the Popol Vuh's archival history now. In the 1550s is when the Quiché Maya scribes compiled the Popol Vuh in a manuscript with text in Latin script. I'll show you in a minute a couple of pages from it. In 1701, a friar in Chuvila, Chichicastenango, his name was Francisco Jimenez, saw the original and copied it. In 1853, we know that Abbot Charles Etienne Brassière de Bourbourg stole it from the library in Guatemala. In 1871, Alphonse Pinard purchased it from Bourbourg's estate at the latter's death. In 1883, Edward Ayer acquired it and brought it to the United States. In 1912, it becomes the property of the Newberry Library in Chicago, Illinois, where I understand it remains to this day. And here to your left is a copy of the frontispiece of the manuscript. The text is by Jimenez. The last name can be spelled with a J or an X, by the way. Text by Jimenez in 1701, who copied the manuscript written in Quiché from pre-Columbian sources and from wisdom of the elders and people who preserved it in oral tradition. Because I should emphasize that the Maya recorded information that they deemed important in art, in buildings, like for example stairways, or they had tablets with script, but also in vases or in ceramics. But also elders or sages preserved everything that was important to them in oral tradition, which was just as important as writing. Here's another page of the manuscript showing the alphabetic script that I was talking about in Spanish and in Quiché. As you can see, it has two columns of text. This was in Quiché and this one's in and this one is in Spanish. And this is a translation from 1701. I included the word paleography here because it is the study of ancient text. In paleography, you would read this text, transcribe it or type it, and then annotate it with footnotes in case there is more explanation to be made for particular words. And also, many times you would translate it to other languages. And then the Popol Vuh includes the text that we have contains creation stories, so religion or theology. It features a lengthy story of the hero twins. We have sets of hero twins, and it describes the dealings that the hero twins had with the lords of Xibalba, the lords of the underworld. And this is what I was saying early in the lecture, that the Popol Vuh includes the ideas that Maya had about the afterlife. And it also includes lineages, as we saw, or history, or dynasties of kings and queens, discussion of the nobility and their authority. So it contains history as well. And now to end, let's read from the Popol Vuh. Quote, "This is the beginning of the ancient traditions of this place called Quiché. Here we shall write. We shall begin to tell the ancient stories of the beginning, the origin of all that was one in the citadel of Quiché, among the people of the Quiché nation. Here we shall gather the manifestation, the declaration, the account of the sowing and the dawning, by the framer and the shaper, she who has borne children and he who has begotten sons, as they are called, along with Hunapu possum and Hunapu coyote, great white peccary and coati, sovereign and quetzal serpent, heart of lake and heart of sea, creator of the green earth and creator of the blue sky, as they are called. These collectively are evoked and given expression as the midwife and the patriarch, whose names are Shpiakok and Shmukain, the protector and the shelterer, twice midwife and twice patriarch, as they are called in Quiché traditions. They gave voice to all things and accomplished their purpose in purity of being and in truth. This account we shall now write under the law of God and Christianity. We shall bring it forth because there is no longer the means whereby the Popol Vuh may be seen, the means of seeing clearly that had come from across the sea, the account of our obscurity, and the means of seeing clearly, as it is said. The original book exists that was written anciently, but its witnesses and those who ponder it hide their faces. Unquote. Now there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, as I said earlier, the authors say we shall begin to tell the ancient stories. So they're talking about working in community, not a single author. And the other thing is that creation for the Maya, as well as for other civilizations in Mesoamerica, including the Aztec, is a collaborative endeavor. It's not the work of a single God who is omnipresent, that means present everywhere, or omniscient, that means all-knowing. This is a collaboration between many gods, and it actually includes nature and human beings when you read the whole text. And also, I put in bold certain parts of the text to emphasize that. We shall now write. So the emphasis in writing and also in we, many, community, various people, not just a single person. And when they write under the law of God and Christianity, it indicates that they're writing in the colonial period. However, it is really noteworthy to see how the Maya they're not necessarily encumbered by Christianity and the colonial gaze. They are very much focused on writing a truly Maya account, right? They mention that there's the law of God and Christianity, but they continue writing in very Maya style. And that's even though they feel the pressure to have the Popol Vuh go into hiding, because they say that they no longer have the means whereby the Popol Vuh may be seen, the means of seeing clearly, because they say that its witnesses and those who ponder it hide their faces. So the witnesses are the people who see the Popol Vuh. But remember, the Spaniards and the colonial enterprise are destroying these books and libraries. And also they are prohibiting the right of the Maya to assemble, to get together and discuss these ancient writings. They write, but it's witnesses and those who ponder it. Ponder it means that you meditate on the words that are written down. So the witnesses and those who ponder it hide their faces. Now, I should mention also that they say that the means of seeing clearly that had come from across the sea, is not referring to Europe. It is actually referring to Mesoamerica, because look what it says on page 259 of the Popol Vuh in the Christensen translation. They write, quote, all these they brought, and it's a list of what the sons receive for the authority to rule. All these they brought when they returned. They also brought the writings of Tulan from the other side of the sea. These were the writings, as they were called, that contained the many things with which they had been invested. Unquote.